Let us begin with a simple but unsettling truth. We still don't fully understand consciousness. For centuries, scientists, philosophers, and mystics have struggled with this question. What exactly is the mind? And how does awareness arise from the body? It's the one thing we all experience more directly than anything else. More than matter, more than the external world, and yet it remains the greatest mystery of existence. Now, modern science has tried to explain consciousness in terms of neurons firing, chemicals moving, and circuits activating. And while that picture has given us extraordinary insights into the brain, there is still a gap, a massive gap. The physical explanations don't seem to fully capture the richness of inner experience, the qualia, the feeling of what it's like to be. That's where something surprising, something revolutionary, enters the story: quantum consciousness. This idea suggests that consciousness isn't just a byproduct of the brain, like steam from an engine. Instead, it may be deeply rooted in the very fabric of reality, connected to the strange, mysterious world of quantum mechanics. And if that's true, it means our awareness is not just a private flicker in the skull, but part of the cosmic foundation itself. So in this journey, we're going to trace the story of quantum consciousness from all angles. The science, the experiments, the mystical traditions that hinted at it long before physics was even born, the debates that rage between skeptics and believers, and finally, the implications for humanity's future and for your own spiritual path. This is not just abstract theory. If consciousness truly is quantum, it changes everything: our sense of identity, our relationship with death, even how we manifest reality. This is the full story, and by the end, you'll understand why so many spiritualists, seekers, and scientists alike are drawn to this idea. Now, let's move deeper into the story. We've laid the foundation: what quantum mechanics is, how it shattered the old picture of a predictable, clockwork universe, and why consciousness can't just be brushed aside as a byproduct of neurons firing in the brain. But what happens when experiments themselves start whispering clues that mind and matter may not be so separate after all? This is where things get fascinating, and for many, even unsettling. Let's start with the famous double-slit experiment, perhaps the most iconic in all of physics. Imagine firing tiny particles, electrons, or even photons of light at a barrier with two slits. If you don't look, if you just let them pass through, something bizarre happens. Instead of behaving like little bullets, the particles form an interference pattern on the screen behind, as though they're acting like waves. It's as if each particle is exploring all possible paths at once, smeared out across probabilities. But here's the kicker. The moment you observe which slit they go through, the wave of possibilities collapses. The particle suddenly acts like a discrete object again, traveling down a single path. Observation itself, the act of awareness, changes the outcome. Now, physicists argue endlessly over what this means. Some insist it's just the mathematics, that the wave function collapse is simply a formalism. Others, however, especially those who dare to think beyond materialist assumptions, see it as a profound clue. Consciousness participates in reality's unfolding. But the double-slit experiment isn't the only one raising eyebrows. Let's bring in the delayed choice experiment, first proposed by John Wheeler. He imagined setting up a situation where the decision of whether to observe the particle's path is delayed until after the particle has already entered the apparatus. Logic says the particle should already have decided, wave or particle, based on the setup at the moment it passed through. Yet when you actually run the experiment, the outcome seems to retroactively decide itself based on your later choice. It is almost as if the universe is rewriting its own history to remain consistent with the observation. What does this imply? At the very least, that reality isn't fixed in advance the way classical physics assumed. It seems strangely malleable, contingent, fluid, as if observation, and perhaps even intention, plays a role in crystallizing what we experience as the physical world. Now, let's step into the work of Dean Radin and the field of parapsychology, which has, for decades, attempted to test whether human consciousness can influence quantum systems in measurable ways. In carefully controlled experiments, researchers have looked at whether focused intention can slightly alter the results of random number generators, machines designed to produce unpredictable outcomes. The results are controversial, yes, but across thousands of trials, there seems to be a tiny yet consistent effect, as though mind is nudging matter ever so slightly out of pure randomness. Skeptics dismiss this, of course, arguing that it's noise, that statistical anomalies are bound to appear. But if even a fraction of these findings are genuine, they open a door to something staggering. Consciousness may not only perceive reality, but also shape it at the quantum level. And let's not forget the observer effect in biology. Take the experiments of Benjamin Libet in the 1980s, where he measured the brain's electrical signals preceding conscious decisions. His findings were explosive. Neural activity appeared to decide before a person consciously made a choice. This raised unsettling questions about free will. Are we merely passengers in our own bodies? Or is consciousness working in ways that neuroscience doesn't yet understand, perhaps even influencing those neural processes retroactively, much like Wheeler's delayed choice experiment? It's here that we begin to see a strange harmony between the quantum experiments and the mysteries of mind. If the universe itself is responsive, flexible, somehow aware of being observed, then maybe consciousness isn't just produced by brains. Maybe brains are more like receivers or amplifiers, tuning into a field of awareness that pervades everything. Some researchers have gone even further, suggesting specific models. For example, Sir Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff proposed the Orchestrated Objective Reduction Model, or ORC-OR. According to them, tiny structures inside brain cells called microtubules may be capable of quantum coherence, that is, existing in multiple states at once. When these quantum states collapse, they might produce moments of conscious awareness. In this view, consciousness isn't a byproduct of classical brain chemistry, but emerges directly from quantum processes in the fabric of reality itself. Now, the ORC-OR theory is hotly debated. Many scientists reject it, pointing out that the brain is a warm, wet place, conditions usually thought to destroy delicate quantum states. Yet research in quantum biology is starting to chip away at that assumption. We now know that quantum coherence plays a role in photosynthesis, helping plants transfer energy with remarkable efficiency. If quantum effects can survive inside a leaf, who's to say they can't survive inside neurons? These hints, these scattered clues from experiment and theory, weave together a picture that is both astonishing and deeply unsettling to conventional science. They suggest that consciousness may not be confined to the skull, may not be an accident of matter, but instead may be fundamental, a principle as basic to the universe as space, time, or energy. And here's the mystical twist. Ancient spiritual traditions have been saying something strikingly similar for millennia. The Upanishads of India declared, "Consciousness is Brahman, the ground of all being." Buddhist philosophy speaks of mind as interwoven with reality, not separate from it. Hermetic teachings whisper, "The all is mind." Could it be that modern quantum experiments are beginning to circle back to truths long known to the sages? At this point, let's pause and reflect. The evidence isn't absolute. The mainstream scientific community remains divided, cautious, even dismissive. But the cracks in the old materialist worldview are undeniable. Too many experiments show that reality is not fixed, not solid, not independent of observation. Too many mysteries surround the relationship between mind and matter. And perhaps this is exactly how it is meant to be, not a neat answer wrapped in a bow, but an open invitation to wonder, to investigate, to keep questioning. Because if consciousness does play a role in shaping reality, then we are not merely bystanders in a meaningless cosmos. We are participants, co-creators, threads in the great quantum tapestry. And this realization opens the door to deeper questions. If mind and matter intertwine at such a fundamental level, what does this mean for death? For memory? For spiritual experience? Could consciousness survive the body? Could it reach across space and time? We're about to step into those questions. But before we do, let's remember this. The experiments of quantum physics don't just challenge the scientist in the lab. They challenge each of us to reconsider who we are, what reality is, and whether the boundaries we take for granted are as real as they seem. So now, let us turn the page and look at the ancient traditions that might give us a map for this strange territory. Because while the physicists are still arguing, the mystics have been charting this realm for thousands of years. When we think of quantum physics, most of us imagine whiteboards filled with equations, or maybe particles smashing in massive colliders. But here's the twist: long before modern science ever put names to the mysteries of light, matter, and energy, ancient traditions around the world were whispering truths that sound strikingly familiar. It's as if humanity has always carried fragments of this knowledge, encoded in myth, religion, and philosophy, waiting for science to rediscover it. Let's start in India, where the Vedas and Upanishads painted a vision of reality that feels eerily quantum. The sages spoke of Brahman, the infinite, unchanging field that underlies all existence. Within this ocean of potential, the manifest world arises and dissolves, like waves upon water. Doesn't that sound like the quantum field, an unseen fabric where particles flicker in and out of existence? They also spoke of Atman, the individual soul, not separate from Brahman, but an expression of it. This mirrors what modern physics suggests when it whispers that consciousness itself may not be a byproduct of matter, but rather the ground of being from which matter emerges. Thousands of years ago, Indian mystics were already saying, "You are not separate from the cosmos. You are it, looking at itself through human eyes." Now, shift westward to Greece. The philosopher Heraclitus told us that everything flows, everything changes, and the only constant is flux. This echoes the quantum vision where particles are never fixed, always in a state of probability until observed. Meanwhile, Plato's allegory of the cave suggested that what we see is just shadows of a deeper, truer reality, a higher order that exists beyond the senses. Is that not a poetic description of what physicists now call the hidden quantum realm? Then there's the Hermetic tradition of Egypt and the Hellenistic world, which gave us the principle, as above, so below. As within, so without. A reflection of the holographic nature of the universe that modern scientists are just beginning to probe. The Hermeticists taught that the mind shapes reality, that consciousness is not passive, but creative. Once again, we find ourselves in resonance with quantum ideas that suggest the observer plays a crucial role in shaping outcomes. Let's not forget China. The Taoists spoke of the Tao, the ineffable way, the source of all things, eternally balancing between yin and yang, order and chaos, being and non-being. In their vision, opposites do not cancel each other. They complement and co-create. Isn't this remarkably close to the wave-particle duality of quantum mechanics, where light is both wave and particle, depending on how it's observed? And Buddhism might be the most quantum of all. The teaching of Anyat, or emptiness, tells us that nothing has an inherent, fixed essence. Everything exists in interdependence, arising through relationship and perception. This is pure quantum logic. Particles have no definite properties until they are measured, until they are entangled with an observer or environment. Reality, according to both Buddhism and quantum physics, is not solid. It's relational, contextual, and deeply mysterious. Even the Mayan and Aztec civilizations encoded similar wisdom in their calendars and cosmologies. They saw cycles within cycles, patterns repeating at every scale, as if time and space themselves were woven with fractal intelligence. Today, physicists studying holographic principles or the geometry of space-time are rediscovering something these ancient star watchers seem to already know. Reality has structure, but it's not mechanical, it's alive with rhythm and intelligence. So here's the haunting question. How did they know? Were these parallels just coincidence? Or could it be that the ancients accessed reality in ways beyond the five senses, through altered states of consciousness, meditation, ritual, and visionary experience? Could it be that what we now call quantum insights were glimpsed thousands of years ago, not in laboratories, but in temples, caves, and sacred groves? Imagine a Vedic sage sitting under a tree, entering deep meditation, dissolving the illusion of separateness and experiencing the infinite field of being. He didn't need a particle accelerator, his mind was the instrument. Imagine a Taoist mystic contemplating the flow of rivers and clouds, realizing the invisible pattern behind them all. Imagine a Mayan priest mapping the heavens and intuiting that the universe itself is a living code. Quantum physics may have given us the language of mathematics and probability, but perhaps the ancients had the language of symbols, myths, and metaphors. Two languages, pointing to the same reality. And here's where it gets even more intriguing. Many of these ancient traditions didn't just describe the structure of reality. They gave us practices to align with it. Yoga, meditation, mantra, ritual, alchemy, shamanic journeying, all were ways of tuning consciousness, of stepping into resonance with the hidden field. If consciousness does indeed play a role in shaping reality, then these practices were not just spiritual, they were technologies. Technologies of consciousness. Today, scientists are beginning to circle back to this. Research on meditation shows measurable effects on the brain and body. Psychedelic studies reveal that consciousness can radically shift the perception of reality. Experiments in parapsychology, though controversial, continue to suggest that intention, focus, and awareness might influence the material world in subtle ways. So perhaps the ancients weren't primitive at all. Perhaps they were pioneers of inner science, mapping the same territory that quantum physicists are now charting with equations and instruments. Now pause for a moment and let that sink in. Across continents and millennia, human beings who never met, who spoke different languages, were all hinting at the same truth. Reality is not what it seems. Consciousness is not just an accident of neurons. The universe is not a dead machine. It is alive, interconnected, participatory. And maybe, just maybe, this convergence of ancient wisdom and modern science isn't accidental. Maybe it is a sign that we are on the edge of a new paradigm, one that unites the mystical and the empirical, the inner and the outer, the timeless and the cutting edge. But to embrace it, we must be willing to let go of old assumptions. To see the world not as a collection of separate objects, but as a web of relations. To see ourselves not as isolated egos, but as expressions of a universal field of consciousness. That's what the ancients were trying to tell us. And that's what quantum consciousness is whispering once again. When we step into the heart of the matter, we encounter one of the most profound questions ever posed. Is consciousness fundamental to the universe, or is it merely a byproduct of physical processes, emerging when matter reaches a certain level of complexity? This is the crossroads where science, philosophy, and spirituality converge. And depending on how you answer, you're essentially deciding the nature of reality itself. Let's begin with the mainstream scientific position, the emergent view. According to most neuroscientists, consciousness arises when the brain, through billions of neurons and trillions of synaptic connections, reaches a sufficient level of complexity. It's a kind of software that emerges out of hardware. From this perspective, the brain doesn't generate consciousness on purpose. It is just a natural result of biological evolution. Imagine an anthill. No single ant knows the master plan. Yet somehow, through the collective behavior of thousands, the anthill structure emerges. Similarly, consciousness, in this view, emerges from the coordinated firing of neurons. No single neuron is conscious, but the network is. This explanation feels logical, but it runs into problems when we probe deeper. One glaring issue is what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness, a term popularized by David Chalmers. The hard problem asks, why is there subjective experience at all? Why is it that neurons firing electrical signals are accompanied by the feeling of being alive, the sense of I am? Why don't brains just process information without any inner movie, any awareness? That inner movie, the colors you see, the emotions you feel, the memories that rise within, has no obvious explanation in material terms. You can measure brain activity until the end of time, but nowhere in the data do you find redness or sadness or the taste of chocolate. This is where the fundamental view comes in. Many thinkers, both scientific and spiritual, argue that consciousness isn't something that emerges from matter. Rather, matter itself may emerge from consciousness. This view is sometimes called panpsychism, or in its stronger forms, idealism. The idea is that consciousness is woven into the very fabric of existence. Just as space, time, and energy form the foundation of the universe, so too does awareness. In the 20th century, the physicist Sir Arthur Eddington, who helped confirm Einstein's general relativity, once remarked that the universe seems to consist of mind stuff. Eugene Wigner, a Nobel laureate in physics, also suggested that consciousness is essential in collapsing the quantum wave function. Even Max Planck, the father of quantum theory, declared that consciousness is fundamental and matter derivative from it. If this is true, then the entire paradigm of science flips. Instead of trying to explain consciousness as a side effect of atoms colliding, we begin to see atoms themselves as ripples or patterns within a universal consciousness. Now, let's pause here. You might be wondering, how do ancient traditions fit into this debate? And the answer is, remarkably well. For example, in Vedanta philosophy, consciousness, or Atman, is described as the ground of all being. In Buddhism, mind is seen as the field from which all appearances arise. In Hermetic thought, the principle of mentalism states, the all is mind, the universe is mental. In other words, what modern panpsychism argues in philosophical terms, ancient mystics asserted as experiential truth. They didn't arrive at it through mathematical equations, but through deep meditation, ritual, and states of expanded awareness. But let's return to the scientific tension. Advocates of emergence argue that panpsychism doesn't really explain anything. It just shifts the mystery. If consciousness is fundamental, what are its rules? How does it combine to form complex awareness like ours? Why doesn't the rock seem conscious, even if in some subtle way it contains consciousness within its atoms? Panpsychists counter that emergent explanations are equally incomplete. Simply stacking complexity upon complexity doesn't solve the hard problem. You can describe how neurons fire, but you can't account for why that firing is experienced. It's like trying to explain music by describing air vibrations. It's accurate, but it doesn't capture the felt quality of hearing a symphony. Now, here's where quantum mechanics enters the battlefield. Some scientists suggest that quantum processes within the brain, particularly in microtubules, as proposed by Stuart Hameroff and Roger Penrose, might serve as the bridge between physical processes and subjective awareness. The theory, known as orchestrated objective reduction, or OR, suggests that quantum collapses inside neurons could give rise to conscious moments, stringing them together into the flow of experience. Critics argue the brain is too warm and wet for delicate quantum states to survive. Yet recent discoveries in biology, such as quantum coherence in photosynthesis, hint that life might indeed exploit quantum effects in surprising ways. If Orko R is true, it may suggest that consciousness is both fundamental and emergent. Fundamental, because it requires quantum processes baked into the universe. Emergent, because it takes the complexity of a brain to focus and channel the consciousness into self-awareness. Another angle is the integrated information theory, IT, developed by neuroscientist Giulio Tononi. According to IT, consciousness corresponds to how much information a system integrates into a unified whole. By this definition, even a simple circuit might have a minuscule degree of consciousness, while human brains, with their massive integration, have a much richer experience. IT doesn't claim consciousness is fundamental, but it does suggest it may be far more widespread than we think. That computer on your desk? It might have a flicker of awareness, though unimaginably faint. And so, the debate rages on. Fundamentalists accuse emergentists of reductionism, missing the essence of experience. Emergentists accuse fundamentalists of mysticism, dressing up mystery as explanation. Yet perhaps both sides are describing different aspects of the same reality. Consciousness could be like light, behaving as both particle and wave, depending on perspective. From one view, it emerges through complex patterns. From another, it's the underlying field in which those patterns unfold. What's striking is how much this debate echoes ancient paradoxes. In the Upanishads, sages declared that Atman, individual consciousness, and Brahman, universal consciousness, are one and the same, separate yet unified. In Taoism, the Tao manifests as the 10,000 things while still remaining the undivided way. Science is now stumbling upon the same conundrum mystics have wrestled with for millennia. How can the one become the many? And how can the many still be the one? And here's the deeper implication. If consciousness is fundamental, then our role as observers is far more powerful than science has traditionally allowed. We are not passive witnesses of a meaningless universe. We are active participants in a conscious cosmos. Every thought, every act of attention may ripple outward into the very structure of reality. On the other hand, if consciousness is purely emergent, then we are rare anomalies in an otherwise unconscious sea of matter. That makes us fragile, precious sparks, destined to vanish when the machinery that sustains us, the brain, shuts down. Both views carry profound consequences. One places us in a living, interconnected web of mind. The other casts us as temporary islands of awareness, brief but miraculous. So which is true? The jury is still out. Experiments in neuroscience, quantum physics, and artificial intelligence may eventually tip the scales. But for now, the debate remains open, and in that uncertainty lies a kind of wonder. Because maybe, just maybe, the truth is stranger than either camp imagines. Maybe consciousness is not strictly fundamental or emergent, but something else entirely, something we don't yet have the language to describe. And as we stand at the edge of this mystery, we are reminded of a simple fact: the very ability to ask this question, to reflect on it, to wonder, that in itself is consciousness at work. The mystery is not out there. It's in here, listening, asking, perceiving. The implications for spiritual seekers and the future of humanity. So what does all of this mean for us? Not just as curious thinkers, but as spiritual seekers. First, it reframes death. If consciousness is quantum and fundamental, then perhaps it doesn't end when the body dies. Just as energy cannot be destroyed, awareness may simply shift, dissolve, or rejoin the larger field. Near-death experiences, out-of-body accounts, and mystical visions all take on new significance in this light. Second, it empowers practices like meditation, intention, and manifestation. If mind and matter are linked at the quantum level, then our thoughts are not just private. They ripple into the field of probability, influencing outcomes in subtle ways. That doesn't mean we can magically bend reality at will, but it suggests that consciousness is an active participant in creation, not a passive bystander. Third, it suggests a future where science and spirituality converge, instead of opposing each other. Imagine neuroscience exploring meditation, not as a curiosity, but as a window into the quantum fabric. Imagine physics considering consciousness not as a side effect, but as a cosmic principle. This would not just revolutionize science, it would reshape civilization. Finally, for you, the individual seeker, it is a call to take consciousness seriously, to treat your awareness not as something trivial, but as the very ground of reality, to nurture it through practices that expand it, whether that's meditation, mindfulness, prayer, or deep contemplation. Because if quantum consciousness is real, then to know yourself deeply is to know the universe itself. And so we return to the beginning, the mystery of consciousness. Science has probed the atom, split the nucleus, sent rockets into space, but the simple fact of being aware remains the most profound riddle of all. Quantum physics offers us a clue, a doorway. Ancient traditions offer us wisdom, metaphors, and practices. And together, they converge on a vision that is both humbling and empowering, that consciousness is not a side effect of the universe, but its foundation. The full story of quantum consciousness is not yet complete. Experiments continue, debates rage, discoveries await. But one thing is clear. To explore consciousness is to stand at the edge of the greatest frontier. And maybe, just maybe, the truth is that you are not just in the universe. The universe is in you.